Hi everyone, Jim here from Mystery and Mayhem. Today we'll be doing spooky October reads. First of all, I want to do a reading update on Occult Detective October. I have finished Jules de Grandin by Seabury Quinn, and I really like these stories. The character, they're reminiscent of Sherlock Holmes and Watson, but Jules de Grandin himself, he talks kind of like Hercule Poirot. Got lots of French swear words and exclamations, and he's actually a lot of fun to read, and he's kind of a funny character. But the stories were good, but there was others that were better than the others. I mean, they were kind of hit and miss. There was the paranormal ones I found more interesting than the realistic mystery ones, and these are scattered throughout. I think there was maybe 3 paranormal ones, and the rest of them were realistic mysteries, and they were pulp stories, so they were a little far fetched. I mean, in one of the stories, him and his assistant, Dr. Trowbridge, have dressed themselves in ancient armor somehow, all by themselves, and they're in the armor, and Jules de Grandin goes plowing through all the bad guys while he's wearing this ancient armor and knocking them over. And I mean, it stretched the bounds of credibility a little bit, but again, it's a pulp story, and they're not, they're not looking to do literature or highbrow stuff. They were just fun, interesting stories to read, and the characters were very cool. And so I'm gonna look for the rest of them. I think in this series there's 5 others, or they have 5 collected editions, big hardcovers, which might be kind of hard to find now, either the paperbacks or them. But I'm going to look for more of them because I really liked these stories. So that's an update on what I read this week. What I'm going to be reading next week are post-1960s occult detective. So this guy, Lord Darcy, Murder and Magic, falls under that category. These, the bulk of these were written in the 60s, and one of them in 1973, I think. So these fit the bill for post-1960s occult detective. And so that should be fun. And then I've got this book of short stories, Vampire Detectives. And so that they'll be interesting. They'll be a lot of fun to read. And this one, I'm not sure if I'll get to them all this next week. I'm going to try to do all 3 of them, but this one here is pretty long. Black Magic Woman by Justin Eustanis. Sorry if I mispronounced that name, but yes, that should be a lot of fun. Now Dave Brzezinski from Occult Detective magazine said he really enjoyed this, so I'm going to look forward to reading that one. So now I want to get on to the spooky books for October, and I got a few of them here. I'm going to start with Fritz Liber, who you might know from the Sword and Sorcery characters Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. But Fritz Liber was also a pretty mean horror and sci-fi writer. So these 2 are short stories. And look at those, like that cover is awesome. Today I just read the story in this one called Youre All Alone. And it was written in 1943, but it was very reminiscent of the Matrix movies and the Adjustment Bureau. Very creepy vibes to the story. And, I can't help but think that the people who wrote the Matrix, the Wachowski brothers, whatever their name is, might have been inspired by this story. I've read that story twice, and it still kind of gives me very creepy vibes to read it. And Fritz Liber he's a brilliant writer when it comes to that kind of thing. So, I mean, that's, if you can find that story, that's very good story to read, very interesting. And then there's, again, Night Monsters, who's very good at doing horror stories. That one includes The Black Gondolier, Midnight in the Mirror World, The Creature from Cleveland Depths, The Girl with the Hungry Eyes. So yeah, if you can find Fritz Liber, he's not just a sword and sorcery writer. Now this one here is just a big book of short stories called Beyond the Curtain of Dark, Masterpieces of Horror, and that's edited by Peter Haining, who's a well-known anthologist. And there's some well-known authors in here: Patricia Highsmith, Ambrose Bierce, Ray Bradbury, Theodore Sturgeon, William C. Morrow, and Frederick Brown, among others. And it's a beat-up old copy, but there's some good stories in here. H.P. Lovecraft and August Derleth. Mary Shelley has a story in here. So yeah, that's kind of a cool thing, and some good stories. And like I said before, I'm a fan of short stories. It's my favorite type of fiction. And I've got some more short story anthologies here. The Screaming Skull and Other Great American Ghost Stories. Look at that cover. And it's got stories by F. Marion Crawford, Edgar Allan Poe, Willa Cather, Mark Twain. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And this is just a neat book. Christopher Lee, From the Archives of Evil. And these are personally chosen, apparently, books by Christopher, or stories by Christopher Lee. And he does the introduction. And Henry Kuttner, I, the Vampire, Robert Bloch, Basil Copper, Richard Matheson, Robert E. Howard, The Black Stones in that volume. So that's worth picking up if you can find it. Cool old paperback. This one's kind of cool. This is fairly new, so you might be able to still find this at the bookstores. Short stories, ghost stories with old Western cowboy bent to them. So it's got stories in here by Louis L'Amour, Elmer Kelton, William Johnstone, and who else is in here? These are just fun stories, and edited by Martin H. Greenberg, who you probably know, who's another well-known anthologist. Worth picking up. And that's, like I said, that's a fairly newer book, so you might be able to pick that up at the stores. And that was a lot of fun. And here's the Grand Old Masters: Frankenstein, Dracula, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde. Now, this is a neat Signet edition with an introduction by Stephen King. Now, out of these three, I think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's probably my favorite story. And Robert Louis Stevenson is a favorite of mine. And I've read that story 3 or 4 times. And his wife actually had him destroy the manuscript when he first wrote that back in the day. And when he realized what he'd done, he actually rewrote the entire story from memory and finally published it to our great pleasure. But so that's kind of a nice addition. And these other two are worth a reread as well. It's been quite a while since I read Frankenstein and Dracula. So yeah, that'll be fun. This here is Shadows Bend by David Barber and Richard Raleigh. Have Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft as the main characters, and they run into some creatures of Cthulhu. And again, this was a lot of fun, and the writers did a little bit of research into the two writers. There was a little part in here though where it kind of threw me off, where they had Robert E. Howard say he was talking about his character created Red Sonja, but he's talking about the one that was created for the comics, not his own Red Sonja. So that kind of threw me off a little bit, but maybe that was a publisher thing that they threw in there. I don't know, but still, regardless of that, it was a very fun book and worth reading if you can pick it up. I read that for the first time in high school years and years ago. It's the same book, still in good shape, called The Nightboat, Robert R. McCammon. And they are coming to seduce the living and devour the dead. Deep under the calm waters of a Caribbean lagoon, salvage diver David Moore discovers a sunken U-boat entombed in the sand. Then David hears something that twists his soul in utter terror, the deep, hollow boom of something hammering with feverish intensity, something trying to get out. And you might be able to tell from that cover there was undead Nazis in the submarine. And this was a lot of fun. I think I've only read it the one time in high school, so it's been on my shelf ever since then. It's probably due for a reread because McCammon's a very good writer. This one here, it's called The Wolf's Hour. I don't know how scary it is. Like, apparently he's a werewolf secret agent of some sort. So I don't know if it's more of a spy story or a horror story or a mixture of both, but that's just like an awesome cover, and you can't really go wrong with Robert R. McCammon. And I'm looking forward to reading that one sometime this month for Spooky October. Now, these two have been on my shelves for a long time. These are erotic horror, Hotter Blood, More Tales of Erotic Horror. These are short stories. And this one is called I Shudder at Your Touch. 22 Tales of Sex and Horror. It's got Stephen King, Clive Barker. Yeah, so these are very cool books to have on the shelf, and I'm looking forward to delving into those. And those are just nice copies, brand new. It looks like the one hasn't even been cracked. Like, it's like brand new. I've had it for quite a while. And this is a nice big book of short stories called Vamps. Obviously, vampire stories. And that's edited by Martin H. Greenberg. And I do believe that this edition has the story Carmilla by Sheridan LaFanu. That's got a story by Manly Wade Wellman, Tanith Lee, Stephen King. And I think that might be from a Salem's Lot universe, like story. So that's, yeah, and look at that cover. That's a creepy cover on there. I'm looking forward to that one. That's a nice big book. And a few more. This is the Penguin book of vampire stories. Another awesome creepy cover, and I think that has Carmilla in it as well. But there's a lot of good stories in this one. You know, you can't go wrong with a vampire for Halloween or Spooky October. And again, it's got stories by August Derleth, Fritz Liber, Richard Matheson, E.F. Benson, Algernon Blackwood, Robert Bloch. Yeah, so that's a nice one to have. And that Penguin just does them up right. I love Penguin books. And here, this is the Mammoth Book of Monsters. Now, you might see a few more of them I have back on the shelf behind me. There's quite a few of them. You can see all the Mammoth books they have there. And they've got everything under the sun. I've got Mammoth Book of Private Eye, Mammoth Book of TV Detectives, Locked Room Mysteries, and this one is just the Mammoth Book of Monsters with that creepy, awesome cover on there. And it's got quite a few stories. Again, Ramsey Campbell, Robert E. Howard, The Horror from the Mound, Brian Lumley, Basil Copper, Carl Edward Wagner, Joe R. Lansdale. It's got a lot of stories in there, and there's a lot of good reading in that book. And, of course, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Now, I've never read this. So, actually, I don't think I've ever read Shirley Jackson. And that's a fault of mine. So I'm going to read this one for certain. This is going to be a definite read this month for Spooky October. And it's not a big, long book. But these editions are nice. You can get these at Kohl's or Indigo for $3 for $10, even though it says $7 on there, and you get all the old classics. So I've got quite a few of these Arcturus editions, which are nice. They're well put together. And finally, Chilling New Tales inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, The Children of Cthulhu. And that's a big book with lots of short stories in there, and they'll be scary and creepy to read. So, yeah, I'm gonna read through that one, and that has stories. Richard Lehman, See if I recognize anybody. Alan Dean Foster did a story in here. Michael Reeves, Poppy Z. Bright. Yeah, so Caitlin R. Kiernan, and that's just kind of a cool book. And I'm gonna read that one sometime this month. So yeah, I just wanted to share those spooky reads with you. And if you think about it and you get a chance, share down in the comments what spooky books you'll be reading this month. I look forward to seeing them, and seeing what kind of you find spooky. I like the old pulpy horror stuff. I mean, I like horror, but there's a lot of the modern horror that just kind of doesn't do it for me. Like disturbing body horror stuff. I just, it kind of takes up rent in the back of my head and it barricades the door. So yeah, that's kind of not my thing. But this old pulpy, good old ghost story or vampire story, that always does it for me. But yeah, I wanted to share that with you, and I wish everybody in Canada a happy Thanksgiving if you happen to be out there. And all the rest of you, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care. Happy reading.